He was just too small. Back in June of 1942, a 16-year-old kid, barely scraping 5'5" and tipping the scales at a measly 110 pounds, walked right into a U.S. Marine recruiting office. The recruiter didn't even bother to look up from his paperwork. He just flat out laughed. The Navy? They bounced him even faster, saying he was too undersized. The Army paratroopers? They told him to go home, eat some Wheaties, and come back when he'd grown up. This kid was like a walking, talking design flaw. He was like that P-38 fighter plane that couldn't make a turn. By any military standard you could name, he was completely and utterly useless. But those recruiters made a colossal, fatal mistake. They only saw a boy. They completely missed the weapon that grinding poverty had forged and honed. They didn't see the eyes of a hunter. A kid who had been single-handedly keeping his family from starvation for the past 5 years. The boy's name was Audie Leon Murphy, and in just 30 short months, this pint-sized reject would transform into a one-man army, single-handedly wiping out an entire German company by climbing right on top of a burning tank just seconds away from blowing sky high. The story doesn't kick off on some bloody battlefield overseas. It starts in the bone-crushing poverty of the cotton fields of Hunt County, Texas. Audie was smack dab in the middle, the sixth of a whopping 12 kids. His father, a dirt-poor sharecropper, up and abandoned the family, leaving them high and dry. His mother passed away from pneumonia just after Audie turned 16. Suddenly, this scrawny 110-pound kid was the head of the family, the only breadwinner for his younger brothers and sisters. His main tool? A trusty .22 rifle. His driving motivation? Sheer desperate starvation. A neighbor later recalled Murphy's uncanny marksmanship, saying that kid could drop a running rabbit at 50 yards with a rifle most people couldn't hit the broadside of a barn with. Murphy's own words painted a much starker picture. "If I don't hit what I shoot at," he said, "my family doesn't eat tonight." This wasn't just some leisurely target practice. This was pure survival. Every single bullet cost money the family simply didn't have. Every miss meant empty stomachs grumbling all night long. Under that kind of relentless pressure, Audie Murphy didn't just learn how to shoot. He learned how to kill. He developed the eye of a stone-cold shooter, a chilling efficiency that would one day strike terror into the hearts of German soldiers across 3 different countries. When Pearl Harbor got attacked, Murphy saw his chance to escape. The Army meant steady pay, 3 square meals a day, and money to send back home to his siblings. But he was still only 16. Still seriously underweight. After getting laughed out of every other recruiting office in the state, he finally limped into the regular Army infantry office. The recruiter glanced at the forged affidavit his sister had cooked up, claiming he was 18. Then he looked at the kid in front of him, who looked more like he was pushing 14. He sighed heavily and stamped the papers anyway. The U.S. Army had absolutely no clue what it had just done. It had just signed up a walking, talking field modification. A human weapon that would save hundreds of American lives by breaking every rule in the book. Private First Class David Mussour, who went through training with Murphy, remembered, "We all thought he was just a mascot." The drill sergeants rode him mercilessly, called him baby. But then they got to the rifle range. Those baby blue eyes of his turned as cold as a winter's night. He never missed a single shot, not once. In July 1943, Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, splashed ashore in Sicily. Deep in the mountains, Murphy's hidden talents were finally unleashed on the world. His rural upbringing meant he moved through the terrain like a ghost, silent and unseen. He used the lay of the land to his advantage. He shot with deadly, unwavering accuracy. Near Palermo, his unit got pinned down by a well-placed German machine gun. This was his first major problem. The official army doctrine said, "Wait for support to arrive." Murphy's personal doctrine, honed by years of hardship, said, "My family doesn't eat if I wait around." While the other guys hunkered down and took cover, Private Murphy, the 110-pound baby, used the terrain to sneak his way around to the enemy position all by himself. He wiped out the entire machine gun crew with a handful of grenades. Then, in a move that would come to define his entire military career, he turned their own machine gun around and used it on the retreating German forces. Captain Paul Harris immediately recommended him for a Bronze Star, writing in his report, "This soldier displays a natural aptitude for combat that is nothing short of extraordinary." Extraordinary was a massive understatement. Audie Murphy had just stumbled upon a dark truth that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He was exceptionally, almost preternaturally, good at killing. Sicily was just the opening act. The Italian campaign is where Murphy truly transformed from a good soldier into a walking, breathing nightmare for the German Wehrmacht. At the Volturno River in October 1943, his squad got absolutely decimated by a ferocious German counterattack. Instead of retreating with the rest of his unit, Murphy grabbed a borrowed sniper rifle and held the position all by his lonesome. 5 German soldiers, all taken down at over 300 yards. For this display of unbelievable courage, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest medal the Army could bestow. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a force of nature. Staff Sergeant William Polson described Murphy's unique method of fighting. "Murph didn't fight angry," he said. "That's what was so terrifying about him. He fought cold, calculated, like he was just doing arithmetic. See a German, eliminate the German, move on to the next German. No emotion, no hesitation, just deadly efficiency." Then came Anzio, that blood-soaked beachhead that Churchill himself called a wildcat. The immediate problem? A heavily armored German tank. The one thing that infantry soldiers fear more than anything else in the world. Murphy didn't just fire off a few rounds with his bazooka and hope for the best. He crawled towards the tank, using every inch of the terrain for cover, until he was practically point-blank range. He completely destroyed the German tank. For this act of bravery, he was awarded his first Silver Star. He had somehow managed to survive Sicily, Salerno, Anzio, and Rome. He'd been wounded more than once. He'd been steadily promoted to sergeant. The skinny farm boy from Texas now had a reputation that preceded him wherever he went. But in August of 1944 came the crucible, the ultimate test that changed absolutely everything. Near Montélimar, France, his platoon got caught in a deadly ambush. The main problem? His lieutenant, his commanding officer, was killed in the opening volley of fire. The entire chain of command was instantly broken. Sergeant Murphy didn't wait around for orders to come down from above. He became the order. He immediately took command of the entire platoon. The situation was utterly impossible. 18 American soldiers against a full German company of over 100 men. For 2 long, agonizing hours, Sergeant Murphy held a critical crossroads against overwhelming odds. He fearlessly directed his men, exposed himself to enemy fire time and time again, and personally accounted for at least 15 enemy dead. He held the line. The Army, finally realizing what it had on its hands, gave him a battlefield commission on the spot. On October 14, 1944, the kid who was once deemed too small to even enlist was now Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy. But combat always comes at a steep price. By January of 1945, Murphy was no longer the fresh-faced 16-year-old kid who had showed up at that recruiting office. He was only 19 years old, but he looked like he was pushing 40. He had watched almost every one of his original friends get killed or seriously wounded right in front of him. He had personally killed over 100 enemy soldiers. And now, he found himself facing the Colmar Pocket. The Colmar Pocket was the last sliver of French soil still under German control. Hitler had ordered it to be held at all costs, and he had sent in his absolute best troops to make sure it happened. The 2nd Mountain Division, elite soldiers, veterans of the brutal winters in Norway, specifically transferred to the area for this critical offensive. For Company B, the situation wasn't just desperate. It was practically over. Just look at the cold, hard numbers. In 5 days of constant, brutal fighting, Company B had lost a staggering 102 men. All of the officers, except for Murphy, had been killed or evacuated due to injuries. From a full strength of 187 men, they were now down to a mere 40 effectives. Murphy himself was fighting with a fresh leg wound from shrapnel. He didn't tell a soul about it. Private Anthony Abramsky vividly described their overall condition. "We were finished, done, cooked," he said. "Most of us hadn't slept in 3 days straight. Half the guys had frostbite. Our machine guns were constantly freezing up. We tried to dig foxholes, but the ground was like solid iron." January 26, 1945. The dawn broke gray and bitterly cold. Company B was stretched out in a thin, fragile line along the edge of the Holtzfear forest. In front of them lay a mile of wide-open, frozen ground. They were, as Abramsky put it, sitting ducks just waiting to be shot. Murphy had carefully positioned his only anti-tank capability, 2 M10 tank destroyers. He had his 40 utterly exhausted men, and he had a field telephone line connected to the artillery, which was his only real hope for survival. At 1:00 p.m., sharp, the German artillery barrage began with a deafening roar. Tree bursts, shells exploding high in the treetops, showering the frozen ground with a deadly rain of hot steel fragments. It lasted for a solid 30 minutes, turning the forest into a nightmarish hellscape. At 1:40 p.m., the actual ground attack commenced. Private First Class Donald Ekman was the first to spot them. "You could see the pennants fluttering on the antennas of the German tanks," he said. 6 of them, big as houses, and behind them, Jesus Christ, 250 infantry, all decked out in white snow camouflage, moving across that field like ghosts. Murphy's first action was to immediately call for artillery support. But artillery fire alone wouldn't be enough to stop this juggernaut. The Germans were too spread out, too numerous, and moving way too fast. At 600 yards, the M10 tank destroyers finally opened fire. Their first few shots missed the mark. The crews were utterly exhausted, their hands numb from the bitter cold. The return fire from the German tanks was immediate, accurate, and utterly devastating. An 88 mm shell slammed directly into the rear M10, squarely hitting the turret. The vehicle burst into flames. The crew scrambled out as fast as they could, running for the perceived safety of the woods. The forward M10, trying to maneuver into a better firing position, slid sideways into a drainage ditch. Its tracks couldn't get any traction on the frozen ground. Its crew quickly abandoned it and joined the general retreat. It was now 2:20 p.m. Both of the tank destroyers were completely out of action. The German infantry was now closing to within a mere 200 yards. This was the breaking point. The moment the entire position would be overrun and annihilated. This is when Lieutenant Murphy made a decision that completely defied all logic and reason. He ordered his remaining 40 men to fall back. to retreat to pre-prepared positions deeper inside the woods. "Fall back!" he yelled at the top of his lungs. But he himself didn't retreat. Instead, as his men ran for their lives, Lieutenant Murphy ran forward. He ran directly through the deadly curtain of artillery and machine gun fire. He ran headlong toward the burning M10 tank destroyer. The vehicle was fully engulfed in flames at the rear. Thick, black smoke billowed from the hull. At any given moment, the thousands of rounds of ammunition and 300 gallons of highly flammable gasoline inside the vehicle could explode, turning the whole thing into a massive, shredded bomb. Murphy didn't even hesitate for a second. He climbed right onto the back of the burning, exploding tank destroyer and manned its .50 caliber machine gun. From this exposed position, he was a perfect, unmistakable target. A single, silhouetted figure standing on top of a ticking time bomb, completely exposed to 250 rifles and 6 enemy tanks. Private Abramsky watched in stunned disbelief from the edge of the woods. "I saw Lieutenant Murphy climb on top of that burning tank destroyer," he said. "It was the single greatest display of guts and raw courage I have ever seen in my entire life." The .50 caliber Browning machine gun is a devastating weapon in the right hands. In Murphy's steady hands, it became an instrument of absolutely precise destruction. The cold hunter's eye, honed in the cotton fields of Texas, took over completely. For the next hour, this 19-year-old, 110-pound kid transformed into a one-man army. He wasn't just blindly firing at random. He was calculating every single shot. He held the field telephone in one hand, calmly calling in artillery strikes with pinpoint accuracy. He held the trigger of the .50 cal in the other, unleashing a withering hail of bullets. He created a veritable wall of steel. Sergeant Elma Broly observed the carnage from the edge of the woods. "The German infantrymen got within 10 yards of Lieutenant Murphy," he said. "He killed them in the drawers, in the meadows, in the woods. Wherever he saw them, they went down." The German forces, these elite mountain troops, found themselves caught in an utterly impossible trap. Their tanks, which should have easily crushed the position in a matter of seconds, were now completely useless. They couldn't advance without their infantry, and their infantry was being systematically destroyed by a single, unseen machine gun, firing from inside a thick cloud of black smoke. Technical Sergeant Morris Wald, watching the unfolding drama from the battalion command post, testified, "Murphy's fire was unbelievably effective. He wasn't just spraying bullets. Every single burst was carefully aimed. He was picking off German infantry like he was at a shooting gallery. I saw him cut down an entire squad that was trying to flank our position. The Germans tried everything they could think of to eliminate him. They repeatedly hit the tank destroyer with shells. Shrapnel tore through Murphy's leg, causing his second wound of the day. He completely ignored it. He just kept firing. He just kept calling in artillery strikes closer and closer to his own position. At 3:10 p.m., after 40 minutes of continuous, relentless firing, the .50 caliber machine gun started to slow down. He was running dangerously low on ammunition. The Germans sensed it. They started to rush forward, hoping to overwhelm him. Murphy grabbed his carbine rifle and started picking them off one by one. The Germans were now just 10 yards away. This was the end. Murphy made his last, most desperate call. He ordered the artillery to fire directly on his own position. The forward observer, Lieutenant Walter Weiss Fenning, flatly refused. He knew it would mean certain death for Murphy. Murphy screamed into the phone, "I'm giving you a direct order. Fire on my position now." The first 105mm shells landed a mere 50 yards away. The powerful explosions threw frozen earth and deadly shrapnel in all directions. The German infantry, caught out in the open, were ripped to shreds. But Murphy, fully exposed on top of the burning vehicle, was also right in the middle of the impact zone. The combination of his withering direct fire and the artillery shells exploding all around him finally broke the back of the German attack. The surviving infantry, perhaps 100 men, turned and ran for their lives. The tanks, now without any infantry support, quickly reversed course and withdrew in complete disarray. It was 3:20 p.m. After one impossible hour of unbelievable courage, the attack was finally over. Audie Murphy, his uniform scorched and tattered, his leg bleeding profusely, finally climbed down from the burning M10. Just 10 minutes later, the tank destroyer finally exploded in a massive fireball. He walked calmly back to the woodline where his men were waiting, stunned and speechless. According to Private Abramsky, he was scary calm. Scary. He asked if they had sustained any casualties, made sure everyone was okay, then sat down, lit a cigarette, and asked for a status report. His hands weren't even shaking. On that single day, Audie Murphy killed or wounded an estimated 50 German soldiers. He had single-handedly stopped a combined arms assault by 250 elite troops and 6 tanks. He had saved his company from certain destruction, and he had secured his name forever in the annals of history. The battlefield was a scene of utter devastation. German bodies lay scattered across the snow-covered fields. The elite 2nd Mountain Division, the veterans of Norway, were in full retreat, their officers unable to rally them for another assault. But perhaps the most shocking part of this incredible story is the deafening silence that followed. In the decades after the war, historians meticulously searched the German military archives, the veteran organizations, and the personal diaries of the soldiers involved, looking for any German account of that fateful day. They found almost nothing. A near-complete absence of first-hand reports from the men who had attacked Holzwihr. This silence is the most powerful proof of what Audie Murphy had truly accomplished. The German units involved suffered approximately 50 casualties directly from Murphy's actions alone. Many eyewitnesses were simply eliminated in the fighting. But more than that, the entire German war machine was built on a foundation of pride and elite training. The 2nd Mountain Division had fought in Norway, Finland, and on the Eastern Front. They had seen absolutely everything that modern warfare could throw at them. But they had never seen anything like this. The very idea that 250 of their best men, supported by 6 heavily armored tanks, were not just defeated, but utterly humiliated by one scrawny, 110-pound American kid standing on top of a burning tank was a tactical defeat so profoundly shameful that they simply erased it from their collective memory. It was incomprehensible. It didn't fit into their rigid doctrine. It didn't align with their worldview. It was a fatal flaw in their own carefully constructed logic. The official German war diary for that day tells the barest of lies. It reads, "Attack on American positions near Holzwihr, repulsed with heavy casualties. Enemy resistance heavier than expected." Heavier than expected? That enemy resistance was one single man. They had met someone who was simply better at war than they were. And that stark recognition broke something fundamental in their warrior identity. Their tactical plan was flawless. Their equipment was vastly superior. Their soldiers were among the elite of the German army. And one farm boy from Texas with a stupid idea had completely shattered it all. The hunter had become the hunted. Murphy's stand had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate tactical victory. This wasn't just about saving Company B from annihilation. This was about the bigger picture. The successful defense of the Bois de Boulte forest, the position that Murphy had flatly refused to give up. broke the back of German resistance in the entire region of Alsace. The German failure to break through the American lines meant that the days of the Colmar pocket were now numbered. Holtzwihr itself, the village they had been desperately trying to defend, fell to the Allied forces the very next day. Within a few weeks, the entire German bridgehead west of the Rhine had been completely eliminated, removing approximately 50,000 German troops from the war and freeing up valuable Allied forces for the final assault into Germany. The skinny farm boy from Texas had just changed the entire map of the war. On June 2, 1945, near Salzburg, Austria, Lieutenant General Alexander Patch formally presented Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy with the nation's highest military honor, the Medal of Honor. The official citation, typically understated in official military documents, struggles to fully capture the incredible reality of that day. It reads, "He was alone and exposed to German fire from 3 sides. But his deadly fire killed dozens of Germans and caused their infantry attack to waver. For an hour, the Germans tried every available weapon to eliminate Second Lieutenant Murphy. But he continued to hold his position." Murphy's own words, as always, were far more direct and to the point. When asked why he had climbed onto the burning tank destroyer, why he had performed such a stupid and reckless action, his response was simple and heartfelt. "They were killing my friends." He later elaborated, "It wasn't a heroic act. I just figured if one man could do the job, why risk the lives of others?" This was the McKenna mindset, the piano wire fix. It wasn't about seeking personal glory. It was about recognizing a fatal problem and finding a solution, no matter the cost. To this day, his military record remains unmatched by any American soldier in history. He received every single combat decoration for valor that the United States Army could possibly award, some of them twice. His 33 decorations included the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, the Legion of Merit, 2 Bronze Stars, and 3 Purple Hearts. He also received 5 decorations from the grateful governments of France and Belgium. The boy who was once deemed too small and insignificant to be a Marine had become the most decorated American soldier of World War II. Then, the war in Europe finally came to an end. The guns fell silent. Audie Murphy came home a conquering hero. He was a national icon. He was featured on the cover of Life magazine. He was given ticker tape parades in the streets of major cities. He was invited to Hollywood to try his hand at acting. He became a movie star, appearing in over 40 films, including To Hell and Back, where he famously played himself. To the general public, this was the perfect Hollywood ending, the ultimate rags to riches story. The poor Texas farm boy who had single-handedly defeated the Nazis and become a rich and famous star. But this is not where Audie Murphy's story truly ends. This is where the real war, the missing page, begins. The public only saw Audie Murphy, the celebrated war hero. They did not see the fatal flaw that the horrors of war had etched deep inside his soul. The man who had shown absolutely no fear while standing on top of a burning tank was now deathly terrified of the dark. Murphy's post-war struggle with what was then commonly called battle fatigue, what we now understand to be severe post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, was a constant and agonizing battle. He suffered from chronic insomnia, recurring nightmares that haunted his sleep, and a hypervigilance that led him to sleep with a loaded pistol under his pillow every single night. He was relentlessly haunted by the ghosts of war. He wasn't haunted by the enemy soldiers he had killed. He was haunted by the faces of the friends he couldn't save. He had somehow managed to survive, but he had never truly left that bloody battlefield behind. Eventually, he couldn't even bring himself to sleep inside the house anymore. He moved out to his garage, where he slept with all the lights on, because the suffocating darkness reminded him too much of those terrifying night patrols. "I can't remember a time when I didn't have nightmares," Murphy wrote. "They became a part of my life, like breathing. A demon seemed to have taken up permanent residence inside my body." His first marriage, to the actress Wanda Hendricks, lasted only 16 months before collapsing under the immense strain of his PTSD. Hendricks later described him as being two completely different people. During the day, he could be charming, funny, and incredibly generous. But at night, he transformed into someone else entirely. He'd patrol the house with a loaded gun, reliving battles from years earlier as if they were happening all over again. The war had finally ended for America, but it had never ended for Audie Murphy. He was now fighting a new enemy, an invisible one that lurked inside his own mind. And it was an enemy he couldn't defeat with a rifle or a grenade. Despite his own crippling struggles, Murphy became one of the first and most important public advocates for veterans' mental health. In the 1960s, he boldly broke through societal norms and military regulations to speak publicly about his nightmares, his insomnia, and his personal demons. This was the stupid action of the post-war era. In a time when battle fatigue was widely seen as a sign of weakness or even outright cowardice, America's greatest war hero stood up and declared, "I have it." He was once again the man on the front lines, bravely pointing out the problem that the engineers and the politicians were deliberately ignoring. He wrote for the Saturday Evening Post, "What about the veteran who can't? What about the thousands of young men coming back from Vietnam with the same problems?" He was no longer fighting for Company B. He was fighting for all veterans struggling with the invisible wounds of war. But this time, he wasn't alone. In 1951, he married Pamela Archer. And this is the other missing page of the Audie Murphy legend. This is the story of the other true hero. Pamela was a 31-year-old former airline stewardess, and she saw the two distinct men that resided inside Audie, the celebrated hero and the tormented demon. And unlike almost everyone else, she didn't run away in fear. Pamela Murphy possessed a unique insight that the public never got to see. Audie carried invisible wounds that would never fully heal, she said. He'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night, reliving battles from 20 years earlier. But he never stopped trying to help other veterans. The war had never truly ended for Audie, but he managed to channel his pain into a powerful purpose. For 20 long years, Pamela stood steadfastly by his side, offering unwavering support and understanding. She was his anchor, his crucial field modification against the constant chaos raging inside his own mind. She helped him raise 2 sons. She bravely endured the relentless nightmares. She steadfastly supported his tireless advocacy for veterans' rights. She was the indispensable crew chief for the hero who was still fighting his own personal war. Then, on May 28, 1971, the impossible happened. Audie Murphy, the man who had somehow survived every conceivable horror of war, the man whose very statistics said should have died 20 times over while standing on that burning tank, died at the age of 45. Not in battle, but in a private plane crash in the mountains of Virginia during a violent thunderstorm. America collectively mourned its greatest hero. But for Pamela Murphy, the real mission was just beginning. Audie had dedicated his life to fighting for his friends and fellow soldiers. Now Pamela would dedicate the rest of her life to fighting for his legacy and for the countless veterans still struggling with the same invisible wounds. She had witnessed the devastating effects of PTSD up close and personal for 20 years. And now she was determined to do everything in her power to fix it. After Audie's tragic death in 1971, the world discovered yet another missing page of the Audie Murphy story. The most decorated soldier in American history, the man who had become a celebrated Hollywood star, died deeply in debt. Poor investments and gross mismanagement by others had left his estate and his widow, Pamela, with virtually nothing. She was now a 50-year-old widow with 2 teenage sons to raise and a mountain of her late husband's debts looming over her head. This was her Colmar pocket. This was her utterly impossible situation. The world fully expected her to simply fade away into obscurity, a tragic footnote in a war hero story. But they forgot who she was. She was the woman who had stood by Audie Murphy's side for 20 long years. She had faced his demons head-on every single night. She was a warrior in her own right. And now, she had a brand new mission to fulfill. Audie's war was finally over. Hers was just beginning. She did something that completely defied all expectations. She didn't write a tell-all book, cashing in on her late husband's fame. She didn't sell his priceless medals to pay off her debts. Instead, Pamela Murphy, the widow of America's greatest war hero, walked into the Sepulveda Veterans Affairs Hospital in Los Angeles and asked for a job. She didn't ask for a high-level executive position. She didn't exploit her famous name to get ahead. She took a job as a simple clerk, a patient liaison, working directly with the veterans themselves. This was her piano wire fix. This was her climbing on top of the burning tank. For the next 35 years, Pamela Murphy dedicated her life to Audie's other war. She arrived at the hospital every morning, sat down at her small, unassuming desk, and transformed into a one-woman army for the countless veterans that nobody else seemed to want to listen to. She was the mechanic who saw the fatal flaw in the system and was determined to repair it. She saw veterans shattered by the horrors of the Vietnam War, suffering from the very same battle fatigue that had haunted her late husband for so long. She saw them getting lost in the endless bureaucracy, their files misplaced, their benefits unfairly denied, their appointments inexplicably canceled. These men were the living ghosts of her husband, and Pamela Murphy absolutely refused to abandon them. She became their fierce advocate, their tireless champion, their unwavering voice in a system that often seemed indifferent to their suffering. She was the piano wire in the broken. She leveraged her quiet dignity and the profound moral authority inherent in her name to navigate bureaucratic obstacles. When a veteran was denied medical attention, she personally intervened with the doctor. When a benefit check vanished in the mail, she tracked it down. When a bureaucrat dared to say no to a veteran's request, Pamela Murphy herself would enter their office and remain there until that no was transformed into a yes. She treated every veteran, from the forgotten, homeless soldier in the hallway to the decorated colonels, with unwavering respect. In each of them, she saw reflections of her husband's face, his pain, his struggle. She became Audie's final and most impactful field modification, ensuring his mission's completion, not just preserving his memory. The Audie L. Murphy Memorial VA Hospital in San Antonio, Texas, was dedicated in 1973 to honor his legacy. But Pamela was his living memorial, embodying a 35-year commitment to the principle of leaving no one behind. However, that enduring mission was only made possible by the events that unfolded on that frozen field. Which brings us to the fundamental question: how? How did a 110-pound, 19-year-old boy, wounded by shrapnel, manage to achieve such a feat? It wasn't magic, nor was it a cinematic illusion. It was a confluence of 4 critical factors, the same elements that characterized the improvised piano wire repair: a brilliant mechanic, a critical weakness, a daring innovation, and an improbable outcome. The first key element was the weapon itself. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun, designed by John Browning in 1980. It was undeniably the finest heavy machine gun of World War II. Its 50 BMG cartridge possessed the capability to penetrate an inch of armor plate, with each round carrying enough destructive energy to obliterate a human body. It was exceptionally reliable, functioning flawlessly even in freezing temperatures. In the hands of an ordinary soldier, it was a formidable weapon of suppression. But in the hands of Audie Murphy, it became a precision instrument. He wasn't just spraying bullets indiscriminately. He was aiming with calculated precision, employing the cold, hard arithmetic he had mastered while hunting rabbits in Hunt County. As Sergeant Wald testified, he was picking off the enemy as if he were at a shooting gallery. One burst, one target, spot a German, eliminate the German. The weapon was exceptional, but the man wielding it was a true master. The second factor was the incredibly unfortunate location. That burning M10 tank destroyer. To the Germans, it appeared to be a death trap, a ticking bomb. To Murphy, it represented the perfect, unconventional solution. He understood the machine's hidden nature. What Murphy recognized, and the Germans didn't, was how the vehicle was burning. The M10 carried 300 gallons of diesel fuel and 51 rounds of 3-inch high-explosive ammunition stored within its hull. The German 88-centimeter shell had struck the fuel, not the ammunition itself. While the vehicle was indeed a potential bomb, the fuse was burning slowly. More importantly, the thick black smoke emanating from the diesel fire provided an ideal smokescreen. The Germans knew the fire's source was within the smoke, but they couldn't get a clear line of sight on the man inside. Murphy was, in effect, fighting from within a burning fortress that he knew could explode at any moment. It was an act of ultimate recklessness, yet it was also a display of tactical brilliance. The third factor was the force multiplier. This is the aspect that often goes unnoticed. Murphy wasn't simply a one-man army. He was a one-man fire direction center. While operating the 50 caliber machine gun with one hand, he was simultaneously holding the field telephone to his ear with the other. He was calling in 105 millimeter howitzer shells from his own artillery, located miles away. He was amplifying his firepower exponentially. The Germans weren't just fleeing from his machine gun fire. They were also running from the sky, which was erupting around them, directed by the man concealed within the smoke. This desperate situation ultimately led to his legendary command: "Fire on my position." He was willing to sacrifice himself, utilizing his last and most potent weapon, the artillery, to accomplish the mission. And the fourth, and perhaps most crucial factor, was the hunter himself. Military scientists have attempted to calculate the odds, considering the 250 infantry, the 6 tanks, the machine guns, and the mortars. It's estimated that over 10,000 rounds were fired at Murphy's location during that single hour. Statistical models suggest he should have been hit 15 to 20 times. Yet, he was only struck once by shrapnel from an exploding shell. This wasn't just luck. It was the uncanny skill of a Texas rabbit hunter. He possessed an instinctive understanding of how to remain unseen, how to achieve one shot, one kill. He had, as he himself admitted, transformed into a killing machine. Dr. Dave Grossman, an expert in combat psychology, offered this insightful analysis. Murphy represented the perfect convergence of factors. He possessed the technical skills honed through hunting, the motivation fueled by poverty, the emotional detachment resulting from early trauma, and, most importantly, a protective instinct for his men that superseded his own self-preservation. He wasn't fighting for America. He wasn't fighting for personal glory. He was fighting for his friends. That is the story of the seemingly reckless action that changed the course of the war. The undersized boy who was initially rejected by the Marines. The critical flaw of a 110-pound kid who became the U.S. Army's hidden weapon. The improvised fix of climbing atop a burning tank that resulted in the improbable outcome of halting an entire German army. His lasting legacy, his profound impact, is twofold. Firstly, he shattered the stigma surrounding PTSD, because Audie Murphy himself acknowledged that he suffered from it. Because America's greatest hero admitted he was haunted, thousands of other veterans, for the first time, felt empowered to seek help. He gave them permission to be human. Secondly, there was Pamela Murphy. She dedicated her life to the VA hospital, working there until she was 87 years old, finally retiring in 2007. She never remarried. When she passed away in 2010, she was laid to rest next to him at Arlington National Cemetery. The mechanic was reunited with her pilot. The world recognized a hero. Pamela saw a man. Recruiters saw a fatal flaw. The Army discovered a secret weapon. The Germans encountered an impossible situation. Audie Murphy saw a problem that needed to be solved. It all comes back to that single, defining fact. The one that makes this the greatest untold story of the war. The 110-pound farm boy, deemed too small to be a soldier, became the man who stopped an army to save his friends. And in doing so, he and the wife who loved him saved thousands more long after the guns fell silent.